welcome to my channel. I am Kathryn Fogelman-White. I am a fantasy author and a book marketer and social media manager and kind of all of this and all of that and other things. And I have a Mary Poppins bag too. So, I have with me today Shannon Pemrick, who is a romance fantasy romance author. And I have...
Native motto.
Right. And then I have with me also FP Spirit, who is also a fantasy author. So if you're not into fantasy, you are in the wrong video to be watching.
Or maybe not, because today's topic really helps everybody.
This is true. This is true. Today's topic is about co-authoring, and we're going to kind of dive into the basics of it. And we're going to open with some questions, and then we will share our experiences and our opinions on it. And so that's the thing that we all have in common. We have all co-authored books with each other and with other people. So I have primarily worked with FP Spirit as far as co-authoring. And Shannon has branched out and done huge things with co-authoring. So I'd say at this point she's got the larger amount of experience. So, all right. I will go ahead and read off the questions here. And then most of these, as we're answering them, they all lead into and answer each other. So that's why I'm going to lead out with them. So what is co-authoring and how does it work? Is it just one book or multiple books? Does each author write a book or a chapter or a character? Why did we decide to co-author? What struggles of co-authoring did we face and how did we overcome them? And then finally, what would we suggest to others wanting to co-author? So, let's open up. I think we'll let Frank and I go first since we haven't had as much experience as Shannon. We'll kind of open up with what is co-authoring and how does it work? And kind of go in from there. So Frank, you want to take off?
Well, first of all, Shannon has more experience than anybody, I think. Second of all,
a very broad statement.
Okay, I'll qualify that. Or maybe I won't. People can decide what they want to think. Anyway, to answer your questions about all the different types of co-authoring and what they are, all of the above really fits. I mean, anything can be co-authoring. So what Kathryn and I did is we co-authored on Heroes of Ravenford series. Somehow, these two lovely ladies I'm talking with at the moment managed to become fans of my books. I'm very, very honored, I have to admit, because they're both very talented in their own right. And at some point along the way, was having conversation with Kathryn about okay, so my books are loosely based on a D&D game, role-playing that I did with my family and friends over the years. And, specific campaign with a specific group of characters. And I decided to write the stories as kind of an homage to them. So at one point, I was talking to Kathryn about the game, and she's like, "Oh, I'd love to be part of that. We should, we're talking about making up a character." And I was like, "Well, the next best thing might be, maybe we could fit this character into, one of these books." So that's where it started. And where did it go from there, Kathryn?
Well, it started out with one character, and then she needed a backstory, and then she had a whole family. And because she's not one of those with the tragic backstory of everybody died, she still has everybody. And then she needed a pet, and then she needed friends, and then those friends needed a place to live. So it ended up with like a whole community of characters that I brought in and like threw on the table and said, "See?"
Yeah.
And then at some point you said, "Hey, this character should just really mess up one of the established characters."
And she did. And she did.
And it's so much fun.
And poor Martin was never the same since. I think he's been pushed out of trees, beaten on the head with a pot. I'm trying to think have urns thrown at him.
Yes.
Did he get thrown? He might have gotten thrown out of a window at one point. I'm not sure, but the guy took so much abuse.
Yes. Yep. So, and that's, I did not join in on your books until the 4th one. I came in on the 4th and the 5th one. So, that kind of answers a little bit of, is it just one book or multiple or whatever? It can be, co-authoring can kind of be whatever you need, whatever you want. And so, in this case, he already had his first 3 out, and then my characters kind of took over, and he was like, let's just put your name on the book. And so the last 2 books of the Heroes of Ravenford series have my name on them. And
yes, they did.
And then another way of co-authoring is the 3 of us joined a couple of other writers and dove in together on an anthology called Tales of Thack. So, and those are all based on Frank's world. They were mostly, Shannon wrote stories for it, most with a pre-generated characters. And I had one pre-generated character and then had like a backstory, basically wrote a backstory on a couple of the characters that I had brought in on book 4 and 5. And then other people dove in and wrote their characters from that world and their backstories and whatnot. So that's another way to co-author. And that Tales of Thack is where, like, Frank and I definitely started understanding some of the struggles that co-authoring can have. Because a lot of people come in on the co-authoring scene, they're like, yay, all my friends are writers, let's co-author together. And
in
then
fact, later
go,
exactly
oh
like that.
No.
I want to get Shannon in here, but I just want to say one quick thing first. Shannon, you're good.
You're not good.
She's good. Oh no, she's really good. She's got a lot to share, let me tell you. But just real quickly, the process with me and Kathryn was actually amazingly seamless, at least from my perspective. She hasn't killed me yet, so I'm assuming it was okay for her. But what we did was we went over some of the plots together, and we were going through the different things of what the characters were going to do at different spots, and what we did was we broke it up chapter by chapter, where Kathryn would write some chapters, I would write other chapters, and then we would review it with each other and go over things and give each other feedback and stuff. But to the point where we tried to make them similar, because one of the gotchas that Shannon can talk about is how sometimes it doesn't flow from one chapter to the next, where if it doesn't look like it's the same author or similar. So anyway, I think it was a relatively easy process for us, and we learned from each other. I mean, I know, quite honestly, I learned some better, just character, not so much. Well, some of it was introspection, but a lot of it was also just descriptiveness, just being a little bit more descriptive of how characters were interacting, and things like, instead of using like dialogue tags, just using actually action tags and things like that. That became something I had picked up. So one of the other nice things is if you can learn through the process. Right. But anyway, Shannon, please jump in, because you have so much to offer here. Honestly,
you make me sound like a guru, which let's be fair, I'm not. I will say that, like, my co-authoring experience is mostly related to multi-authors sharing worlds. You guys had touched on, there's many ways to do co-authoring, and there really is. There's right and wrong ways to do it, but as long as you also understand that it's a collaboration. This isn't a case of someone does all the work for you and you slap your name on it. That's ghostwriting. Mm-hmm. It's not, you give a little bit of information, someone else does 99% of the work, and you have a shared name, or you have both your names on it. That's not how that works. It is a full-on collaboration. You need to be pulling your weight, and it doesn't succeed without pulling your weight. And most often, you'll see that people just, when they do collaborations, both their names end up on a book cover or as attributions in the book. But then you'll also have people who go under one name. And that one's a lot harder to do. Both of them are kind of hard to do if you're writing in one story. This is why I haven't done this, in that you touched on it, Frank, that when you start writing a story that is one story, that you're both putting information in it when it comes to writing, how do I put this? Your writing styles have to be matched really well. It's especially important when you're dealing with a single name. There's plenty of authors out there, but when I know off the top of my head, because I loved the series so much, was Aaron Hunter, who did the Warrior series. That is done by two people. I didn't know growing up. I thought it was one person. And the writing style is super smooth. Yeah, yeah. The writing style is very smooth throughout. Now, obviously, we don't know behind the scenes. We don't know if only one person is doing the actual finalized writing, but the other person, we don't know how that's all split out. But generally, people will do what Kathryn and Frank have done, and they'll write pieces here, and then they'll merge them together. I have come across some books where it was very clear. They had both their names on it, so you knew there was two people writing, but you could tell that it was two people writing because they had similar styles, but they didn't mesh just right. So you could read one scene like, okay, and then you get to the next scene, maybe even the same chapter, because sometimes they'd share chapters depending on what the scene was. And it was like the transition didn't jive. It wasn't as smooth as it could have been. So my writing style doesn't generally jive with a lot of people I know, at least. So I don't participate in, at the moment at least, obviously in the future that might be different, but as it stands, I don't co-author with anybody in a single book or a series where we're actually writing chapters together. My first experience doing co-authoring was actually when Frank approached me. He really enjoyed all of the input I had when I had way more time to read your books as you were instead of after the fact. Yeah. So Frank really loved my input, so he wanted my input on two female characters, because as someone who writes female-centric books, and my main characters generally have the spotlight and they're generally female characters, he knew I had some good input on those things. And then here we are. He wants to tell a story about two sisters, which they weren't actually sisters at the time. This was the fun part. This is the fun part about collaborating, is when you guys come to each other with ideas, there's give and take. And you can have this really cool idea, but if you're going to be doing something with someone else, they have to be able to give input as well. And then you guys have to kind of, like a zipper, just weave it together and make it work where everybody has their ideas together. If it's only one person's ideas, then that's not a collaboration. That's just you hand-fisting. You're holding on too tight. Then you should be doing something on your own. So, like, Frank came to me, he's like, here, I have a very unique idea. I want you to take these characters that are already created and give them a backstory. Like a fleshed out, like, here's like the bits and pieces of it, and I want you to flesh this out into a short story. I never thought that would ever happen, because he wasn't the first person who approached me about co-authoring. My friend Allison Lind, she actually approached me first, and it wasn't actually an approach as in we should co-author. It was we both fell in love with the same book cover.
Because you
And,
are a sucker for book covers. Oh my gosh.
I was
Never happens.
So we were in this cover art group, and we both loved it. We knew each other beforehand. We've known each other for years, and I'm like, it'd be so great if we both could use this. And she's like, maybe we could. And then it kind of went from there, in that our styles are not the same. Our styles are very different. So we knew we couldn't co-author, but then we came up with the idea, well, what if we just come up with a story and we both write books in that world, and they're all interconnected. That way our names are separate, but the stories are together. So we were working on that, and then we ended up shelving the idea because we had other things going on, and there were some parts of the stories that weren't really jiving. We were having issues with it. So we decided to put it on the shelf. And then conveniently, Frank had come by and said, hey, I want you to do this thing, which I never thought someone would ever come to me and say, hey, I have these pre-made characters. Now write a story for me. And put your name on it, not my name. It wasn't ghostwriting. It really was a case of, I have these characters, but I think you could write this story better.
Yeah,
and that's really flattering too, and it was fun. I've never had someone at the time give me a character they created and say, sorry, if you hear a cat, that's just one of them. He's very vocal.
Mommy.
He's very cute.
He is very cute, but he's very vocal. So, of course, he derailed me now. So yeah, coming up with a story, it was a lot of fun. It was so much fun. It was complicated because I had to fit parameters I wasn't used to. When I have a character that isn't working for my story, I just change them. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do that. I had to work within these parameters that were not my own. And sometimes they were very strict parameters because they were already like pre-established things that can't be changed, or someone was just, no, this absolutely has to happen. But then there are other things that we were actually able to work through. Like I had mentioned earlier, the two of them weren't actually sisters. They were just raised together. And as I was writing, I'm like, no, these two need to see each other as sisters. And I can prove why. And Frank's like, yeah, no, this is working. Go with it. Let's go with it. So that was part of the collaboration of my ideas could help make something a little bit extra from what it was originally. It was able to breathe extra life into it. It was complicated, but Frank and I also work really well together, so there was never any hard feelings whenever someone says, no, this can't happen, or I don't really like how this is working. Can we try to tweak this so it works better? There was never any hard feelings, and that's always hard. When you're working in a creative space, getting critique, especially as you're going, is really hard. And if you're really protective of what you're doing, it almost feels impossible to actually handle that type of stuff. So you have to be someone who can, A, take that criticism, and B, make sure you're working with someone who isn't gonna, be harsh to you, because you don't want to be working with someone who's really harsh, but you also don't want to be working with someone who's going to be, oh yeah, let's go do it. And in the background, in the back of their mind, like, this is a really horrible idea. You want to be able to have open communication.
Yeah, that open communication is so important.
And
that's where so many co-authoring gigs that I've seen try to start up and happen, that's where they break down so often. It's because it's a lot of hard work. And it was a lot of hard work with what we did with Tales of Thack. But most of our hard work and difficulties came on the publishing side.
Yeah. Yes, they did.
Fast forward to more recently, I was working with Allison again. We decided to unshelve that story idea, and then it just turned into something completely different. Similar idea of what we planned, but we decided instead of this theme, we're going to go with this theme. So that cover that we had wanted stayed permanently shelved.
You still have it somewhere.
I still have it. I have it in my to be used folder, but it is not for this series. And then we were writing it. We had all these ideas. Everything was going great. And then we got distracted again. Naturally, we're
Again.
authors. You get distracted. I mean, come
Ooh,
on.
scroll.
So then we started working on stuff, and she started publishing a series that she dubbed her Legacy World. And it had to do with a lot to do with like Valkyries, Norse mythology. Sorry.
That 5 times fast.
As well as several other types of mythology too. It wasn't just Norse. She was bringing in Egyptian mythology. Later, she had planned on bringing in some more of the South American style mythologies. Everything, Welsh, everything. Just whatever she felt like bringing in at the time and making. Would you please stop? I'm talking.
You have a child.
She had this really, really great urban fantasy romance. And when she wrote that, she had already thought, I have this really great world, but I can't write enough stories in it. So she wanted to open the world to some of her closer friends. So then she approached me as one of those people and says, I want to write a story about Valkyrie. And I want you to write a story. All I had to do, I could make my own characters. I could pick any sort of myth I wanted to work with it. And I didn't have any of those character restrictions that I had with the Tales. So it was a little bit more free, but I had parameters of a world. But at the same time, I was actually able to help her flesh it out. We were able to give input on various things, and I got to actually flesh out a very important event that happened in the past that then got talked about in one of my books on why certain things were the way they were. She had an idea, but then I kind of took it and ran with it, and she really loved it. And that was the great thing about the collaboration, was she allowed people to really play in her world. She had to give the final say, obviously. And we also had to, because everyone wrote their own separate books. We didn't put each other's name on the books. We didn't have scenes. It really was each person wrote their own book, but all this, the series was together. It had an arcing theme, so everything had to work together. And we had cameos. So we were writing each other's characters, or parts of each other's characters, depending on how they worked in the book, and then we had to sign off on it. So we had to, make sure that we were representing other people's characters really well and in certain ways. So I really have enjoyed that, and it's actually that was supposed to be one book. I was only going to do one book, but two books,
Only one.
And I have third on the way, and possibly more in that series. And then that original series you mentioned, we decided, instead of it being a separate thing, we were going to convert it into that world. We would have to change quite a few things to actually make it work, but why not? We had already put all this work into it. Why not just connect them that way? So this world, eventually, as she put it, it is as much as hers as it is ours. So it is a really big group effort. But everyone who's part of it is very experienced. It is not easy. It is very difficult balancing the ideas and things you need and making sure no one else felt like they couldn't contribute. Because the more people you bring in, and this is really important to know, to make sure you keep in mind, when you co-author or collaborate, make sure it's at the scale that you can handle. If I had been doing this as what we call a baby author, someone who probably only had 1 or 2 books out, this would be impossible for me. This would be way too overwhelming. It wouldn't be possible. But as someone who has 16 books out, it is much easier for me to keep track of and work with other people and make sure that everyone's feeling heard and everyone's ideas are all being incorporated in a way that Allison's happy, because even though she says it's much of everyone's world, she gets the final say because she created it. So it's just a respect thing to her. And all that, because we're all friends, and that's also another important thing.
Such an experienced author too. I mean, that helps you know your workflow, how to get into the groove, and how to make sure you stay on schedule, because that's the other thing with co-authoring is scheduling. And that's
you can't just do that all la-di-da. You actually have to have a focus. Now, obviously, there's different writing styles. I'm someone who plots out my books. Some people don't. Some of the people in this series don't plot. They just write, and they free write, and they do things. But they know how they work, so they work their schedule around that. And whereas me, I worked my schedule around how I worked. And you can have different ways of doing things, but you have to make sure there's a sameness enough where it doesn't clash. If as a plotter, if I was co-authoring with someone who doesn't plot, it would never work.
Yeah.
If someone literally plots, then it might work, but it's much more difficult because you need to have a similar scheduling ability. You need to stay on task. It's not something you do casually. Unless you're like a hobby author, obviously. But if you're trying to get people to get excited for your series and get really into this, you need to have set scheduling. You need to have that. What's the word that I'm looking for? I hate it when that happens.
It happens more often than not to authors every time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does.
I have thousands of words in my head, and I can't pick the right one. It's right there at the tip of my tongue. It's...
What are words?
What are
Sounds
words?
like. Sounds
yeah.
like.
It was a spelling bee.
I know that's the other area where I have seen so many co-authorings fall apart. And I know even last year, like around Christmas, there were two groups that I was in communication with or helping with, that they had been trying all summer to co-author Christmas books. And it was notoriously, what was breaking it down was one person who was not communicating and was not meeting their deadlines at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that is where I struggle, even as a co-author. I'm a pantser. If I plot it, then my brain is like, oh, look, we wrote the book. It's done. And I'm like, no. You can't leave me on this. And so I have to pants it to stay excited about it. And then I'm a busy person in real life, and then I just get distracted with a lot of stuff too, and procrastinate, all the normal things. And I have a hard time meeting deadlines. And once I get under the crunch of a deadline, if somebody else has it set, I will like last minute, I have an hour to write a book. Let's do this. And
Allison is like that. Yes.
Always fun.
I love my friends who can do this because I can't do that. It's a superpower. It really is. You have a superpower. Like, and everyone in my group, whether it was Allison, whether it was Satya, whether it was TB, it was just it's just the four of us who did this series. There was supposed to be a fifth one, but she had to drop out because of commitment issues. And it was all three of them. Last minute, like, here's my book. I'm like, you did that in less than 12 hours. You just wrote 20,000 words in less than 12 hours. How?
Wow.
How? Like,
lots of coffee.
How are you alive?
Right. Believe me, we don't like it. And every time we do it, we're like, next time it's going to be different. And then it isn't.
Yeah.
So
right.
Famous last words.
Exactly.
The one thing also though that we're kind of dancing around a little bit, and we were talking about this with Tales of Thack is I kind of like oversaw the what was coming together and pulling together, and beating on people for deadlines, and and then trying to publish it. You do need one person kind of leading things. I mean, they don't have to be overbearing, but at least one person who's coordinating stuff and funneling things in and reminding people.
They have to also be an organized person. You can't just pick anyone willy-nilly. They have to be someone who can, if push comes to shove, say, the deadline was 3 weeks ago. I need it now or you're out.
Yeah.
You know, like, you have to be able to play hardball.
Yeah.
It is, if you're being depended on, you need to bring your end of the deal. And if you're someone who's the coordinator, you have to be able to make those tough decisions.
Yep.
Yeah. And
it's
I
not
think
easy.
too,
Not everyone is meant to be a coordinator, and that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
But make sure you have someone in your grouping who is a coordinator, because otherwise it's not going to go well.
Yeah, that's huge. Is definitely whenever you've got a larger group of people and it's not just the two. Well, and even whenever it's just the two of you, pick out who is going to take the lead. So, like, whenever it was Frank and I with his books, obviously he was taking the lead. These were his books. He had 3 already. So, and I think that's part of what made it so smooth is he gave me the parameters to work with, and then I just went in and had fun. And then I made sure I was trying to stick with his deadlines and everything else like that. So I just made sure I showed up, and then made sure I stayed in communication all the time. And then also making sure that I was flexible since he was the leader, he's the coordinator, I need to stay flexible with what he's needing for this to work. And so, yeah, that's where I always communication, and then just showing up, meeting your deadlines and stuff. Those are the 2 pillars.
Communication is so huge. It is huge for anything, whether it's a relationship, whether it's, co-authoring is a relationship. You know, everything is a type of relationship. And communication is the key thing. Like, almost more important than actually getting everything done, because without the communication, you can't get anything done.
Right.
And you two are great. You two are great on that.
As we've all experienced, sometimes communication is tough, and sometimes we can get embarrassed that we're not meeting our deadlines, or we missed a deadline. Like, we had problems with the Valkyrie Rising series that we had a soft deadline for January. Then we had a hard deadline for February. I was the only one who was done by the hard deadline. The only one.
No.
And not by fault of anybody's doing. They hacked schedules. Everyone was communicating though, so we knew someone was falling behind because of burnout, because they overpacked their schedule, and they were trying to get multiple books written because they had health issues. Someone unfortunately might have that could happen. But as long as we're communicating, and we had good communication about that, it's stressful when those type of things come up right at the deadline, but we were willing to work around that and help each other and try to make things work.
Yeah,
that would have never happened had we not had the communication.
Yeah, and that's where one of the other co-authoring groups I've helped with before and talked to, it was one of the 3 had health issues, but she was not. She went for a long time not communicating that with anybody. And then when she did, it was close to deadline. Everybody was already frustrated, super frustrated. And then the big problem was that she was unwilling to relinquish and let somebody else finish it for her so that the deadline could be met. And that caused, of course, a huge blow up in the group and everything. And it came down to, she just needed to be coached to, do you think you can make this by the deadline? Well, no. And, and why is that? Well, because of my health issues. Okay. Is this helping your health any to stress about this? No. And it's like, okay, then you need to let this go. Do you want to see it finished? Yeah. Okay. You're going to feel better just knowing that it's getting finished. So, and it ended up, working out, and everybody, got along a lot better after that. But,
that is something that's really important, is knowing when to quit.
Yeah.
Knowing when to quit. It is not for everybody. It sounds great. It sounds fun. Writing is fun. it's also the biggest pain in the rear.
Yes, it is.
Okay?
Yes.
Like,
Yes, it is. Oh
it
my
is
God.
so stressful. Like, it is the weirdest dichotomy of I'm having fun and I got tears coming down my eyes. I'm
At
having
the same
so much
exact
fun.
moment. Yes.
It is not for everybody. It sounds great for a lot of people,
Oh,
if
yeah.
not everybody. Like, I want to write a story. Great. Can you? I have no idea. Yeah, me either. I've written 16 books, and sometimes I sit here and I'm like, can I actually write this? I don't know. Let's give it a shot, I guess. But also, I have put stories down. I have on my own that were my own stories. I have started them and said, this isn't working. Shelve it.
Yep.
Shelve it. So if co-authoring is not working, it's okay to admit that it's not working.
Yep.
It's worse to not admit it and try to make something work that isn't making it, that is never going to work.
Yeah.
So, like in the case of the person that you talked to, coming to terms with that, sometimes obviously our pride is our worst enemy in these particular situations.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to take it when you're co-authoring. Pride you can't. You can have pride in your work, but you cannot be so caught up in what you about those feelings of. Like,
I have to.
Yes.
My honor.
Oh no! Don't do that. Stop poaching my characters.
But yeah, that's an excellent point. And that was something I personally ran into with Tales of Sack. I had like a brand new marriage and I was about to pop out a brand new baby. And I had gone months going, yeah, I'll get this
as
story
opposed to
done.
a secondhand baby.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I did inherit a couple of those. So, a couple of bonus kids on top of going to have my own baby and navigating a new marriage and all of these new relationships. And I was like, yeah, I hit the jackpot for sure. And so I was like, oh, it's a short story. One short story. It'll be fine. And then it's crawling closer to the deadline. Yeah. It was getting closer to the deadline and there was one night I was like, okay, if I don't sit down and write this now, if I can't get it done tonight, then I need to tomorrow tell Frank I can't do this. And it turned out that was enough for my brain to kick into gear and get it done. And
well, you were originally going to do more than one story, but we did settle on
originally,
one.
and I did have to go, I think this is the only one I'm going to be able to do.
Yeah.
So.
Well.
And I think, Frank, you did ask me if I was interested to pick up that next story, and I said I didn't have time.
Yes, you did.
Which is also okay to admit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you agree to do something, I was one of the first people to finish with my story. I finished it in less than a week.
Oh,
it was
she had it done fast.
He gave me an idea, and I'm like, okay, I'm writing some ideas down. I wrote this down. What do you think of this? That sounds cool. So I just wrote it, and I was like, I actually wrote
like a good portion of it, yeah.
A good portion of it, and then we actually that's not going to work. I'm like, okay, so I scrapped the whole thing. So I wrote 2 stories basically in a week because it just so happens that where the direction I was going didn't work, and that's okay. Finding that out early, at least I didn't write 50,000 words only to find out it didn't work. I'd only written 3,000 words at that point. It was fine.
About right.
But. So I completed mine in a week, and here I am just twiddling my thumbs, how's
taking
things
everybody
going?
else so long.
Obviously, I'm working on my other stuff, and I think Frank had said, "Hey, would you be able to do a second story?" I'm like, unfortunately, no. It sounded great, it really had, but I had so many other things on my plate at that point that I couldn't, and it's okay to admit that. If someone has to back out and someone else needs to pick up that piece, it's okay to say you can't. That ended up happening in the Valkyrie Rising series, too. The person who had to back out, we needed another book in that place. I was already committed to doing a prequel because I can't seem to write things short. I have been lucky that I have written 2 short stories. One of my novellas was supposed to be a short story. It turned into a novella, which it's being rewritten, and it probably ended up being turned into a full novel at this rate.
Yeah.
My
Wasn't your
my-
first book like 700 pages or something like that?
Yes.
If I remember right? Yes.
And it still stayed, like, after I went and revised it, it still ended up like 600 pages, and it was that whole series. The smallest book is the last book, because it ended up being one of the cases like I couldn't fit everything in the last book, so I didn't want to just overstuff it. So, but it was still a sizable book.
Oh yeah,
that
about 400 pages or so.
Yeah. It was like the longest one was 250,000 words. That was Surrendered. That was book 5. That's why book 6 had to happen, because I just couldn't keep going.
That was a big book.
It was a big book.
It was, I will say, despite all that, and you could say this, but it flows. I mean, it still flows, and that's the nice thing. You know, it doesn't. A little side note: it doesn't really matter how long something is, as long as it's flowing, it is good. It is,
and it tells a very specific story. It's not a story for everybody. I wrote it a very specific way. That's why it's so long. It has a lot of slice of life stuff that I felt was important to tell a very specific story. But aside from that, I can't write short things. So, which is ironic, because it happened again with this series. I was supposed to write one book for Astrid, but then I was plotting everything out. I'm like, I can't make this make sense without writing a prequel.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the okay to write Valkyrie Lost, but it was only supposed to be a short story. It was supposed to be a short story.
And how many pages is it now?
It is 50,000 words. It made it to novel length, because what happened was, as I was writing it, I wrote it out, I finished it, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was fleshed out enough. So I ended up going back and adding more to it, and it turned into a full novel. And even then, because that happened, I ended up running into my deadline, and that's why I was like, I can't add any more. I wanted to add more. I wanted to make it a little bit longer. So now I just create like bonus chapters and stuff on my for my subscriptions and stuff like that. So in the future, it might get revised into like an anniversary edition where it has all of that stuff that I had originally wanted to put into it. But I ran into the problem of deadlines. And because I was running into that problem of deadlines, when we had that person pull out, we needed someone to fill that spot. I couldn't. I was already trying to get 2 books to work. And then, of course, I was like, because I fleshed out the prequel, I was like, actually, I'm going to write a 3rd book.
Oh, my God.
So I have 3 books. That's how I ended up with 3 books in this series. So, of course, I'm committed to these. So Allison was like, I'll pick it up. I have a story that will work with it, which ended up working out really well, because the other people also couldn't pick it up. They didn't feel like they didn't feel comfortable taking that on, because they didn't think they could, which is fair. It's okay. Overall, the long story short of that entire saga is, it's okay to admit you can't take on the extra work. So if someone has to pull out, everyone will you might have to split it, or you might have to say, well, I guess this is not going to be in it. And depending on how you set up if it's a collaboration of separate stories, it might be okay to omit it. If it was crucial, then you might have to rethink your deadlines and hope that you don't have your pre-orders up, because that's a whole can of worms that can be a problem.
Yeah.
To your point there, one of the big things that if you're coordinating any of this stuff, if you're playing it out, if you're in charge of this type of thing, make sure your deadlines are realistic. I mean, add in time there. Make sure don't just think, oh, somebody's going to get this done, it'll be all perfect, and life happens. Life happens, and you really need to plan for that. And case in point of the how long something takes. So we're creating Tales of Thack, and we have there's the 3 of us who've all written before, and then I've got 2 brand new authors. I've got my one friend who's been writing his life's work for the past 30 years. And he did write a short story in this, and he did get it to me in time for the deadline, which I was very surprised at. And then my other friend Tim, who actually He really created the world of Thack, and I've since kind of, he was gracious enough to let me take it and run with it and build on it. So, that has evolved over the years. But I defer to him on a lot of stuff, and I really wanted him to be part of this. And he is an unpublished author, so I gave him a lot of leeway, but he started taking longer and longer and adding more and more to his story to the point where it became a novella. So this section of short stories eventually ended up becoming short stories and novellas. So, and it's the crowning story of the book. It's the last one in it, and I mean it's really good. I absolutely love it, but it was very difficult to get everything together and published in a timely manner. So,
I can also speak on that, and if you're writing group style projects like that for co-authoring, make sure things are similar.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really hard to do. If you don't have anything that's, can be pieced together really well, then it's not going to appeal to the readers. So the one concern I had always had when we were told, oh yeah, Tim's book is like the size of a book. And I'm like,
Yes.
We're all wrote short stories. That's going to feel pretty weird to readers. Theoretically, that should have never happened. That story in particular should have been put on its own. So if you are creating these ideas of what this is, have also expectations how long these stories are going to be. Whether you're writing a single story together, whether you're writing multiple stories that are grouped together in one book, or in the case of like the Valkyrie Rising series, as multiple books, make sure everyone's on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I will say that was definitely a lesson learned for me.
That is something that you want to, like, if you expect all the books are going to be, 80,000 words, someone who is constantly writing 250,000 word books probably is not a good candidate to work with on that particular project.
Mm-hmm.
I got some leeway because my friends know that's how I write. So they're like, because they're separate, we're going to give it and let it slide. And it ends up working. Everything works. Everything fits all the other parameters. Just my lengths are a little bit different. And that's okay for us. That we were okay with those things.
So basically, if you're coordinating this, just make sure that it's all going to mesh in a way that your readers, your audience is going to be okay with it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
And I will. I mean, thinking about Tales from Thaka, we've bounced around the idea of going back and making it into its own separate little book. So that might happen in the future. We'll have to see. Yeah. But how are we doing on time here, Kathryn?
We are now at 48 minutes. So I was thinking, I think we got in all of the basics here, and we got in stuff for if you're co-author, just part of the co-author group, or if you're coordinating it. So I think we kind of covered all of the basics there. And so if you're watching this and you still have questions about things, please drop it in a comment. We'd love to answer that or make another video because we obviously enjoy chatting. And
I can tell.
So, definitely any questions you have, or if there's another video you would like to, or another topic you would like us to do a video on and discuss, also leave that in a comment. So definitely, I am in the description going to leave Shannon and FP Spirit's social links to their website where you can go find their books and everything. Definitely go check that out. Show them a little love. And so like and subscribe and go check out their socials and their website and their books and go buy their books and then leave reviews because you're nice people like that.
Yes, absolutely.
And in the meantime, we will see you in the next video.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.